Hello and welcome to Gameonysus Weekly, your one-stop shop for video game news, keeping up with the biggest stories so you don't have to. I'm your host, Janet Garcia, and today we're talking about Activision Blizzard updates, as well as recaps on Nintendo and Xbox's indie showcases, all these stories and so much more on today's episode. Kicking things off in terms of Activision Blizzard updates, let's talk about Activision shareholders being upset with the entire situation. This comes over from Megan Farouk-Manesh at Axios with the headline, Activision Blizzard shareholder calls company response, quote, inadequate. It reads as follows. SOC Investment Group says that Activision Blizzard's recent promises to improve its culture do not go, quote, nearly far enough to address the deep and widespread issues with equality. SOC Investment Group says that Activision Blizzard's recent promises to improve its culture do not go nearly far enough to address the deep and widespread issues with equity, inclusion, and human capital management that the company is facing. Why it matters. In addition to being an Activision Blizzard shareholder, SOC advocates for ethical business practices and is outspoken on topics like pay gaps between executives and workers. A letter from SOC Executive Director Dieter Weitzniger, shared exclusively with Axios, reads, no change has been announced or proposed that would in any way alter the current process for filling vacancies either to the board of directors or to senior management. No changes have been announced with respect to executive pay, either with respect to clawing back compensation from executives who are found to have engaged in or enabled abusive practices, or to align executives with the equity goals CEO Bobby Kotick articulated. The announced review of WilmerHale is deficient in a number of ways. This firm has a sterling reputation as a defender of the wealthy and connected, but it has no track record for uncovering wrongdoing. The lead investigator does not have in-depth experience investigating workplace harassment and abuse, and the scope of the investigation fails to address the full range of equity issues Mr. Kotick acknowledges. SOC is calling on Activision Blizzard to make the following changes. Increase board diversity and equity by adding a woman director, preferably one with a history of advocacy for marginalized people and communities by the end of 2021, committing to gender balance on the board by 2025, and reserving at least one board seat for a nominee selected by current employees as the representative. Clawback bonuses from executives found to have engaged in or enabled abusive behavior, award no bonuses for 2021, and make future bonus awards contingent on the company as a whole achieving clearly articulated and independently verified milestones for diversity and equity. Undertake a company-wide review, similar to the racial equity reviews that Facebook, Airbnb, Starbucks, and BlackRock have completed or promised, but that will encompass the full range of concerns, including inequity rooted in gender identity, sexuality, and race articulated by Mr. Kotick, Activision Blizzard employees and customers, equity and representation issues in game design, the development process, and in user forums and similar settings. What's next? Although Kotick has promised that Activision Blizzard, quote, will be the company that sets the example for this in our industry, employees and industry observers remain skeptical. At this critical juncture in Activision Blizzard's history, we urge you and the board to push beyond the inadequate response from management and take the steps necessary to protect our investment from the financial, operational, and reputational risks that have come to the fore over the past week, Weitzniger says. Those who are in power and have a stake in the company really speaking out about this and pushing for real change is such a big deal, and I love that this is sort of calling out a lot of the vague and, essentially inadequate, as this letter brings up comments made by leadership of, oh, here's how it's going to change, it's going to be better, and we're going to get it done. But it's okay, but how though? We need to get real practices in motion, have actual demands, and ways that we can document this change occurring as well. So glad to see the fight still very much going on and coming from additional directions outside of just consumers and employees, but also just coming from shareholders directly is absolutely huge. Now let's talk about some high-profile departures from Activision Blizzard. For this, we go over to Ethan Gatch over at Kotaku with the headline, Jesse McCree, Diablo 4 director, no longer at Activision Blizzard. Diablo 4 game director Luis Barrega, lead designer Jesse McCree, and World of Warcraft designer Jonathan LeCraft were let go from Blizzard on Wednesday, two sources with knowledge of the move told Kotaku. And then jumping down, there is an update in which a spokesperson for Activision Blizzard confirmed the departures in an email. One source who learned of the news said Activision Blizzard did not give a reason for the departures, but they come as the company reckons with a California lawsuit alleging widespread sexual harassment and discrimination at Overwatch and Call of Duty publisher. Jesse McCree, the namesake for Overwatch's beloved cowboy fighter and most recently a designer on Diablo 4, was one of the several current and former Blizzard developers who appeared in an image of a BlizzCon 2013 Cosby suite obtained by Kotaku. The suite contained booze and a giant portrait of Bill Cosby and reportedly belonged to World of Warcraft developer Alex Afrasiabi. Oh, and there's a note in here that mentions some of the additional reporting was done by Patricia Hernandez, so shout out to her. And following this, I do want to add that Overwatch League casters stopped saying Jesse McCree's name. There's some also polling from Ethan Gatch's reporting at Kotaku, though it is worth noting that he sources Dextero, who did the original reporting, but then there's like additional contextualization from Kotaku, where they reached out to an esports spokesperson for Blizzard. And the article says some casters commenting over official competitions are now avoiding saying McCree's name. Over the weekend, a fan spotted Overwatch League casters Bren Hook and Josh Sideshow Wilkinson appearing to avoid saying McCree's name during the matches. Instead of saying McCree, they referred to him as the Cowboy. As reported by Dextero, Hook and Wilkinson both went on to like the tweet, noticing the change. And fellow Overwatch caster Mitch Uber-Leslie tweeted earlier this week that he thought this was a good idea. A spokesperson for Blizzard Esports told Kotaku it was not involved in the caster's decision. I can confirm that this was, in no way, a directive from Overwatch League or Blizzard, they said. Hook and Wilkinson responded in an email saying, I can comfortably say that it was a personal decision from Josh and I. And then there's further discussion on potentially changing the name of the character in the game. Once again, showing that, and I imagine everyone listening to the show for the most part is, pro having these conversations and being aware of these situations as they relate to the games you maybe love or know of or play. But I think it's cool to point to things like this because it does show the very, even if you're someone who's like, I am just here to play the games and I just put complete blinders on everything else going around, I think this shows how these instances can have direct impacts in the games themselves. And then obviously, it's clear that changing teams can also have an impact as well. So you see, it's kind of impossible to fully divorce yourself from this information because it just crops up even in the games themselves. So as far as the changes at Blizzard, I think, they are important ones to make. Surely I cannot imagine working on a team, having something like the Cosby Suite come out and then still working with those people. I can't imagine that being good for any team. So if there ever was any trust there, I imagine that trust would have been broken through something like that. So if nothing else, I think this does show that Activision Blizzard is making moves based on the situations that have cropped up and the more information that has cropped up from this lawsuit. I think it also continues to not be enough, but it is something. And as far as names and games, I think it's just a reminder that it can be dangerous to glorify individuals. People are people and people can do awful things or people can change or people can have secrets exposed. And I think sometimes when you do stuff like, naming people in games, putting them as Easter eggs, it can come back to bite you if those people turn out to be not who we thought or hoped they were. And as much as I think there is value in having developers by name, and obviously there's always gonna be developers who are the faces of things and kind of at the forefront on stages answering questions, I think it is important to remember that it's a team focus and not ever glorify one individual developer too much. Continuing with more industry shifts, Apex Legends developer fired after offensive blogs surface. This comes from Tom Phillips over at Eurogamer, who writes, Apex Legends game designer Daniel Klein has been fired from developer Respawn after offensive blog posts written by him were recently surfaced. Klein has apologized unreservedly for the sexist and racist language in the posts, which he says were written in 2007. I was recently confronted with some awful statements I made on a blog I wrote back in 2007. Klein wrote on Twitter a couple weeks ago. I take full ownership of the things I said, and I'm embarrassed, sad, and angry at my younger self for saying this stuff. I hope it is obvious that I don't believe these things anymore. While posts date back to over a decade ago, a video by Apex Legends content creator Thornton Smash, this video, claims Klein was aged 27 at the time. Klein is well known among the Apex Legends community for his focus on in-game balance issues. He would regularly interact with fans and comment on balance changes, and sometimes clash with players over alterations to particular character abilities. Last night, Klein confirmed that he was no longer working at Respawn and had been fired at the end of last week. You may or may not have seen the awful, bigoted things I said in 2007, Klein wrote. I wholeheartedly agree that that guy should have been fired. I have poured so much energy into becoming a better person since since then, and right now I'm very depressed because it feels I'll never be able to make up for who I was. Quote, I said racist and sexist things not because I deeply believed any of them, but because I knew I could get a reaction out of people. That does not excuse anything I said. The impact of my words was the same regardless of what I believed. Klein concluded with an apology to other developers at Respawn. Lastly, I'm truly sorry to the Apex team. This is a headache they did not need. I know what their future plans are, and I absolutely believe Apex has a bright future. There's so much cool shit coming. I just wish I could have worked on it. Eurogamer contacted EA and Respawn for comment yesterday, but has not had a response. So yeah, this is an interesting situation in that there's like so many layers to it. On one hand, that is a pretty old post, you know, tracing back to 2007. On the other hand, you were 27 when you wrote the post. So that's pretty rough to come back from, I think. And clearly people at EA and or Respawn felt like it's not something that you could come back from. I think there's so much stuff here because there are people that are in the camp of, oh, like cancel culture has gone crazy and like you can say something like 2 decades ago and it'll come back and you'll be fired even if you're a totally different person now. But I don't know. I mean, it's such an extreme scenario that I think even given how old it is, considering how old the person was when they wrote it, it's just, you know, like I can't imagine anyone doing that and then it being like, oh, that was just like a different time, like I was a different person. I think it is worth noting that like in the apology mentioning how like, oh, it doesn't, you know, absolve me of what I did, but I didn't believe it even then. I was just like wilding out. But then it's also weird because at one point he says, oh, I no longer believe these things. So I feel like we are getting a little bit of that double talk of, did you used to believe it and now you don't believe it, or you never believed it but you just wanted the shock value? I feel like either way, it's pretty terrible. You know, the mention of the shock factor thing, I totally believe that there are people that maybe don't believe it to the degree, but at the same time, I feel like you have to have some level of hate in your heart to think that that's like a worthwhile trade-off to like, oh, I'm gonna, like, you know, I have this conversation with people all the time where they're like, oh, these are the people that are just trolling, like they're not really, almost like they're not really bigots, they're just trolling, but I'm like, they're using bigotry though to troll. Like there's a difference between someone being like, you know, you're an Xbot or you're a Sony pony and like you're a slur. Like those are different levels of trolling that I think come from different places. And continuing on with the topic of diversity in the industry, Racoon Logic faced backlash for lack of diversity in staff photo. This comes over from Megan Farokh-Ramesh at Axios, though again, many people did coverage of this, but I think Megan's coverage is really succinct and kind of discusses a lot of the points that came up. It's another industry story that started from Twitter and then just kind of evolved from there with commentary and all these other elements. And I think this ties it all together pretty well. And if you're checking out the show on the YouTube version of the show, which again, it's youtube.com/Gameonysus is where you can get the YouTube version of the podcast. You can actually see the photo in question right now. Farokh-Ramesh writes, one of the most notorious images in games right now is a photo of 20 mostly white male staffers that was included as part of the announcement of a new Montreal game studio called Racoon Logic. Why it matters. The photo has become central in the discussion of diversity in game studios and who gets a seat at the table. It first started drawing attention yesterday when Bloomberg reporter Jason Schreier tweeted it and noted, quote, it's pretty wild that in 2021 a new game studio still looks like this. The studio currently employs one woman, who co-founder Alex Hutchinson said, quote, unfortunately couldn't make that photo. It's not quite a grassroots startup. Studio leadership has worked at Ubisoft, EA, and Google. The new group is partially funded by Chinese gaming giant Tencent. What they're saying, quote, I can see why people react to the picture of the studio the way they did, Hutchinson told Axios. There are two important caveats, he added, one being that diversity extends beyond gender, and I'm proud that we have LGBTQ members on our team, but also that this is just Racoon Logic's starting point, not the end game. Between the lines, Hutchinson initially responded to criticism with snark yesterday, calling the initial Schreier tweet trolling. But the photo elicited sharp reaction on Twitter, where women in the industry shared anecdotes of being a distinct minority in studios where they worked. Hutchinson's critics said the photo sends a message about who Racoon Logic values having on the team. He says the initial hiring was done prior to outside investment and that the initial reach out before the money came in involved talking to people we already knew about jobs. What's next? Hutchinson says Racoon Logic has, quote, made a point to interview by POC candidates for other positions and will continue to hire. It's not hard to grasp that diversity of opinion and expression, as well as people who have just led different lives and have different life experience, just leads to better games, he said. So I think Hutchinson's initial very defensive reaction is really telling in this instance, personally. Certainly, you can argue that maybe, you know, his default defensiveness is more of a personal thing between him and Jason Schreier, since like his response was very much like on a personal level. To pull up the exact tweet he had tweeted out, you know, well, it's weird because it's like a subtweet because he wasn't tagged, but like he named Jason like with his full name. So I don't know. He wrote, "You know, you've really started your new studio when Jason Schreier is already trolling." He also responded to Jason's initial kind of call out tweet saying, "Hi, Jason," to which Jason said, "Hey, Alex, would love to hear your thoughts on diversity and whether it matters for a game studio." So I don't know, like when you take that and then combine it with like his more documented formal statements to outlets saying, of course, diversity matters, etc. It just kind of, I don't know, I feel like you told me initially who you were. And then when you had to go on record, it was a lot more polished, which obviously we're always going to be more formal when releasing formal public statements. But at the same time, I feel like they have a distinct shift there. Though, if we actually unpack it more, I feel like the shift is not as direct as it may seem. Like, I think on the outside looking in, you know, Hutchinson goes from being very defensive about like, oh, you're trolling me on this, like whatever, you're just trying to talk shit, to being like, oh no, we definitely value this and this is just the beginning of our efforts. But like, let's unpack what he actually had to say a little bit further. Again, looking back at that Axios newsletter, you know, starting off with, I can see why people reacted the way they did. It's a very like offhand, like, oh yeah, I can understand why someone would say this, but not really taking ownership of what's being said or acknowledging what's being said or agreeing with what's being said, which kind of reads to me as, I don't think Hutchinson, suddenly the glass shattered and he realizes that maybe the way that he initially constructed his studio is inherently lacking when it comes to diversity. Like, I don't believe he has that feeling, especially because he follows it up with, there are two important caveats, one being that diversity extends beyond gender, and then talking about the diversity that he does have. And certainly, like, I hope that we can all agree that it is true. Diversity does extend beyond gender. Diversity extends beyond race. There's a lot of ways to implement diversity at a company and a lot of different perspectives that are valuable. But at the same time, I think a lot of times when people do bring that up, it is to skirt the lack of diversity that they do have by being like, no, we have diversity. Look at this. You can't tell me that it's not just straight white men. It's like, it's this other bit, and then kind of parading the diversity that you do have while avoiding acknowledging the diversity that you don't have. Just because you're excelling in one element of diversity doesn't mean that you aren't failing in another. You can have a team with all men of color and it's still missing women, you know? And I think defaulting to when people say, hey, there are no women, and saying, oh, well, look at all these like people of color we have, or hey, there's not as much gender diversity. Yeah, but look at like the queer developers we have, is a misdirection. And it also, I don't know, it doesn't feel great to hear, because it ends up feeling kind of like you are pointing to your other diversity as saying like, hey, we checked some boxes here. So like, you can't tell me we're not diverse because like we have this one thing and now I'm absolved from criticism. And another really telling part of this is when he says the initial hiring was done before outside investment, which I think from like a monetary standpoint, that's kind of why he's bringing that in, like not having maybe the resources to reach out and find more people. But then saying the initial reach out was before the money came in involved. So we were talking to people we already knew about jobs. I feel like that is very much Hutchinson telling on himself, which is to say like, when we went to talk to the people we already knew, we mostly talked to men. Like, that is the fact of the matter. And I do think it's, human nature that we tend to gravitate toward folks who have a form of our background. I think statistically, we've seen a lot of these things take shape. So I'm not saying that this is like, you're the only one that has this problem. Like, this is unique to you and you should like feel extremely bad about it or anything like that. But I think there has to be an awareness of the ways that we fall short and the ways that we contribute to a lack of diversity in the industry. And yes, part of that is like, people complain all the time about like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And like, who you often know is other people like you. And if the industry is predominantly white men or is dominated by white men or has white men at the forefront, it's going to be harder for you if you don't fall into those categories, if you're not checking certain boxes, to get into those circles, because those circles are so homogenous. So I think saying, well, we talked to people we already knew, I feel like that's missing the component of saying, hey, and maybe I don't know enough people from other backgrounds. Maybe my inner circle isn't actually diverse. I feel like there isn't that self-awareness. There isn't that reflection. There isn't that urge to change. And so many people fall into that. And that's why you see that in a lot of studios or companies in general, be them in development, be them in media, where they're made up of your friends, and that's fine. But like, have you noticed that you only have like white male friends, and how that might end up being a problem? Like, I think we can have really talented individuals that come from a more privileged background and have that totally be true. Like, I think those people totally deserve to work in the industry. I'm not saying that they shouldn't have jobs, but I do think that there's a lack of acknowledgement in the ways that your social tendencies end up having an impact on the industry, and that impact being an exclusionary impact. But we'll see what comes out of Racoon Logic. Obviously, there are plenty of really qualified and talented people on that team. I do hope to see that this team expands from a diversity standpoint. I do think there's a lot of really fantastic conversations that did surface from this that I'm sure other articles have documented as well. Talking about things like when you start from a place of homogeneousness and which I don't even know if I'm saying that word right, but and especially when it's like you have all these friend relationships, it becomes really difficult to bring in new people because they're inherently like a double outsider. Like, not only are they from a different background, but also they don't know the people, they don't have those friend relationships, they don't have that history. And even though I don't think that initial construction comes from a place of malice, but I think we need to acknowledge that you can still do damage without trying to be malicious. And I think that there's still very much that gap. And I feel like it's so obvious to the people from those groups, and so many of them have talked about it, but there seems to be a lack of acknowledgement of all of those points that those groups have brought up when things like this surface. And now for some delays. The Intellevision Amico has been delayed again to the end of next year. This comes from Kristofer over at VGC. And this is just one of many delays of this console, which again, if you need a refresher on it, it is meant to be, quote, a unique video game system for friends and families, with the pitch being that it comes with 6 preloaded games, and additional games range from $3 to $10 at launch. There's no bad language, graphic violence, blood, or sexual content. Every game is E for everyone or E10+. The gameplay adapts to your skill level. There's no ads, paid DLC, loot boxes, or in-game purchases, and it's supposed to have an extensive library ranging from sports and recreation, educational and brain games, party games, and retro classics to your favorite table games. But again, this has consistently failed to just get off of the ground, and at this point, I'm not sure when we're really going to get this thing, if we're going to get this thing, and how that rollout's going to be. I would be shocked if this gets any form of stability or meaningful continued support. I think the idea is pretty interesting, but I also think it's for a highly niche audience where I feel like this thing would be something that could find success if it was like mass marketed and placed at, a Walgreens and a Target, kind of the style that you see those like weird retro-y fake console game bundle things that you can pick up for really cheap. Like, I think it could do all right in that kind of market, but as is, it's taking so long to get off the ground, and like I feel like the people that pre-ordered it, I'm not sure how many of those people are like as casual as I think the intended market actually is. I think it is really cool when people enter the space and do their own kinds of consoles that aren't inherently trying to compete with the big three. But yeah, I'm pretty skeptical about this at this point. If I wasn't already a bit skeptical given all the other delays, and also given how just niche the idea is. Next up, we got an update from the Life is Strange team mentioning that True Colors is still on track fine, still releasing September 10th, and they're also doing a Wavelengths DLC starring Steph Gingrich, which will come out on September 30th. But the Life is Strange Remastered collection isn't going to come out until early 2022. They basically want more development time between True Colors and the Remastered collection. And in a follow-up tweet the following day from this, they mentioned, additionally, Life is Strange True Colors for Nintendo Switch is running a little late. We won't be quite ready to release on September 10th, but we still plan to release this year. Please watch our channels for a confirmed date over the coming weeks. So if you're hoping to play Life is Strange True Colors day one on Switch, you will not be able to do that. You would have to either wait or just get it on a different platform. And lastly, the abandoned app trailer thing got delayed again from when they said they were going to post it, but actually they have since finally got it working. And I think they also deleted the tweets where they said it wasn't working. Maybe that was just to, clarify things for people, but it made it kind of difficult. Like I wasn't able to kind of show y'all the exact wording and the timeline of everything when that went down. But as of 2 days ago, the patch is live and you can access the app and a short intro teaser along with announcements, or like the space where the announcements would be. And I'm actually just like finding this out as I'm recording this, so I haven't been able to download it myself and check it out. But I did sift through the replies, and apparently it's just like a few second video of someone walking over hardwood floors that are slightly illuminated in like blue light coming in from the other doorway, and that's it. It's just them walking. And if you're looking at the YouTube version, you can like see the video clip of them just like walking. Apparently it's also a pretty big download. It's like 5 gigabytes, and there's space for like gameplay demos, like channel reveal and all that stuff. But currently there's just like a teaser to the trailer, and it is just the walking. And you get like access to the menus, but the menus don't have anything like inside of it. So that's kind of weird. I feel like that was a choice that probably shouldn't have been made. But here we are. We'll see how things progress. I feel like this is going to be like an unfortunately contentious game, so we'll see how it goes. But for now, here are some game events that are coming up. Xbox announced its Gamescom plans, with Aaron Greenberg tweeting out, "Join us digitally at Gamescom this year. Our Xbox stream is focused on game updates coming this year, so to set expectations, no new reveals or major surprises. But the team has a fun stream planned with our amazing hosts, Harris and Kate Yeager, which is taking place on Tuesday, August 24th at 10 a.m. PT. And then we have some stuff going on from Pokemon that says, "Attention trainers, tune in to our YouTube channel on Wednesday, August 18th, 2021 at 6 a.m. PT for a Pokemon Presents video presentation featuring Pokemon Brilliant Diamond, Pokemon Shining Pearl, and Pokemon Legends Arceus. So be sure to mark your calendars for both of those events." And now let's recap some events, starting with Xbox's ID at Xbox. And for this, I'm pulling from Imran Khan's roundup at Fanbyte, which lists all the games shown off in alphabetical order with a shout out to whether or not they're on Game Pass. So we have Aeon Drive, Anvil, Origami 2, which is on Game Pass, Button City, Evil Genius 2, coming to Game Pass, Inked, Inculinati, Lab Rat, Library of Arena, which is Game Pass, Lightyear Frontier, Loot River, Mad Streets, Ali Ali World, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, Planet of Lana, Project Wingman, Paparazzi on Game Pass, RPG Time, Sable, Sam & Max Save the World Remastered, She Dreams Elsewhere, Solid State, Soup Pot, Space Lines from the Far Out, Stardew Valley coming to Game Pass, The Big Con, The Veil Shadows of the Crown, and The Wandering Village. And kind of goes on to write, "Of particular note here, Stardew Valley being on Game Pass is a pretty big deal, as the game is extremely popular still and is the ideal Game Pass game for keeping people hooked through a subscription. Aeon Drive is a slick action platformer with a demo out today and the full game out in 2021. Library of Arena, another Game Pass launch, is out today. And The Veil, Shadow of the Crown, is an entirely audio-based adventure that is fully deaf accessible." All right, now let's talk about the Indie World Showcase, which was just a quick 20-minute presentation put on by Nintendo. We got to look at Bomb Rush Cyberpunk, which a lot of people, I had live stream my reactions to this one, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's Jet Set Radio," and yeah, pretty much has like all of those stylings. And this is a timed console exclusive for Switch that's coming out in 2022. We got another look at Toem, which is this black and white photography game. Again, photography has had like a really big push in these recent years. It's cartoony, it's cute, I'm intrigued by it, and it's coming out this fall. Remember when Loop Hero came out and everyone was like, "Oh my god, this is so great, but I wish this was on Switch"? Well, that wish is coming true this holiday season. We will be getting that port, which is really awesome. Loop Hero, for those who aren't familiar or maybe need a refresher, it is that looping roguelite kind of management style game. It plays a lot like playing a board or card game, but by yourself. It has a lot of like surprises along the way. Really enjoyable one that I think is going to find a great home on Switch. We got another look at that new game coming from the creators of Far Lone Sails, which is Far Changing Tides. This is essentially an exploration game to a degree, but you're also sort of managing your, ship or vehicle internally. So it kind of is like almost like a chiller version of Lovers in Dangerous Space Time, where you're trying to like manage different parts of the engine and go from sector to sector. That's at least how like that first game was. So I imagine this one is kind of following similar things. And from time to time in that first game, you would like leave your ship and then do some other additional environmental puzzle solving. So it seems like this is a bit more of the same. It does look graphically a lot more impressive than the last one, so we'll see how this one turns out. And this comes out in 2022, so it's going to be a next year release. Necro Barista Final Pour. This is a first-person narrative adventure game about like being at a coffee shop that's for those who are between, like, they just died and they're going into the afterlife. So you spend like one day in this sort of in between scenario essentially. And I had initially played this a little bit on Apple Arcade, and I loved the art style, and like the general story was really interesting, but it didn't really control quite right or perform quite right on Apple Arcade. So I'm hoping that it feels better on console. So I am interested in checking this one out. And it's cool because the sort of additional Final Pour style one will also have a studio mode where you can kind of make your own scenes and have like dialogue and make these like different shots. So that seems pretty interesting. That's out now. Garden Story is an action RPG where you're now the Guardian and you're trying to return the Grove to its glory. Very cartoony, kind of pixely, really cute. I started playing this already because it's already out. It was one of the shadow drops. So far, it's solid. I'm looking forward to continuing with it. It's a little slow paced, but I like the overall premise and I'm hoping to dig into the systems even more. The long-awaited Boyfriend Dungeon finally came out. This is something that people have been looking forward to for a long time, and it finally dropped today. Essentially, it's a part dungeon crawler, part dating sim, where you can also like date weapons because some of the people can also become weapons. So you can like take them onto your dungeon adventures, and like when you level up the relationship, like the weapon also improves. So it's kind of interesting how like the systems feed into each other. That one's another one that I am just in the beginning phases of, but am generally enjoying so far. Not totally blown away by it, but I'm enjoying seeing how both the genres sort of feed into each other. The still drops just keep on coming. Axiom Verge 2 is out now at the time of this recording. It was one of those ones that was later today. And this again is like arguably one of the best like Metroidvanias that isn't a Metroid game. A lot of people absolutely adored the first one. So I'm definitely going to pick up the second one and see, how it is. Definitely a highly anticipated one and probably the highlight of the showcase for a lot of people. We got to learn about Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon. This is a Shovel Knight puzzle game in which you are doing it includes dungeon crawling, but also competitive puzzles. And it looks really cool. Like, I like that you're kind of doing navigation and action within the puzzles themselves. And it comes out holiday on Switch. Islanders Console Edition is out now on Switch. And this is like a, calm, peaceful game about building islands. It's been on PC for a little while. Looks really cool. Excited to check that one out too. We got another look at Metal Slug Tactics, which is coming out in 2022. Tetris Effect Connected is coming to Switch with cross-platform multiplayer on October 8th. Again, Tetris Effect, one of my favorite Tetrises ever. You may think you've had enough Tetris or that Tetris is just more the same, but this is definitely like a very different vibe, but building on an incredible game design foundation. So an absolute must play if you like Tetris at all. A Sizzle Reel showed off Astroneer, which comes out January 2022 to Switch. Slime Rancher Portable Edition, which is coming out later today, aka it's already out now. And remember that sequel is dropping too. We got Lumberjack coming out in 2022. Curious Expedition 2 is another shadow drop that's out later today, aka already out. And Gang Beast comes out fall of 2021. This time around, Nintendo's One More Thing was highlighting Eastward, which is a 2D action RPG from Chucklefish, which is the publisher behind Stardew Valley, and it's going to be a timed console exclusive that comes out on September 16th. And those are all the stories we have for you this week. Thank you so much for watching over on youtube.com/Gameonysus. Be sure to comment, like, subscribe, and tap the bell. And for listening on podcast services, be sure to subscribe there and leave a review if possible because it helps the show a whole lot. And as always, a big thanks to my patrons over on Patreon. You too can join over on patreon.com/Gameonysus where you can get the show via early access. You can also get other cool stuff like letters from a video game world and other content, depending on what tier you go to. And as always, I will see y'all here next time. Bye.